All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 179 today. We're going to be talking about extraterrestrial life and Oumuamua with Avi Loeb. Avi is a professor, author, and physicist at Harvard, and we are very fortunate to have him on today. You can check out his new book, Extraterrestrial. I have the link down below for the Amazon. And also, you can check out our stuff at patreon.com/Mind Escape Podcast for just $2 a month. You'll get exclusive content and episodes. I believe we are going to do a short one with Avi at the end of this episode today. So you can check that out later. And check us out on Patreon. Also, if you have not already, go to indrasweb.org. This is the social media platform we created to connect open minds. So, if you like the discussion today, and you have different hypotheses or theories that might be a little outside the box, this is the perfect place to discuss those. So again, head on over to indrasweb.org and set up a account. So without further ado, welcome on the show, Avi.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. So I just read your book, really thoroughly enjoyed it. And our favorite kind of scientists on the show are visionary scientists, people that think outside the box, people that are willing to kind of move the needle instead of this slow crawl towards, mediocrity that you see in science today. So why don't we start there a little bit? Your book is, about Oumuamua and this extraterrestrial object, but it's almost like a critique on modern science in a way too. So why don't you discuss a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I really am trying to call attention to the current culture in science, which doesn't have the emphasis on the right principles, as far as I can tell. And traditionally, physics was about evidence and being guided by experiments, because our imagination is sometimes limited, and nature can educate us. So if we are wrong, we will see something that doesn't quite line up with what we expected. And if we are modest enough to admit that we don't know everything, that our scientific knowledge is an island in an ocean of ignorance, then we can make progress. But as soon as you decide that, no, you don't really need the experimental verification, that you can make a monologue rather than a dialogue with nature, you are getting into dangerous territory, because you can start believing things that do not exist. Sort of like being high on drugs, or claiming that you are wealthier than Elon Musk, without going to the bank. But if you try to go to the bank, which is equivalent to doing an experiment, you might be proven wrong. And that's really putting a skin in the game is the key for doing science. And a lot of scientists are afraid of putting skin in the game, making predictions that could be falsified, because it could damage your reputation. It could basically taint your image. And your image is important for getting honors, awards, for belonging to honor societies. And a lot of people in academia, after they get tenure, and by the way, the concept of tenure is all about giving you the freedom, the job security, so that you can innovate and take risks and make mistakes during the process of learning, right? But instead, what people, and when I say most people, I mean like 95% or even more of the community does, is trying to boost the image of doing science without mistakes, and but not taking any risks, and basically repeating things we already know. And when the evidence comes along that doesn't quite line up with what you expect, they just dismiss it and move on, and business as usual. And that's exactly what happened with this object that we will discuss in a minute. And I use it as an anchor to point out that the scientific community, has to change its culture. And the reason it's so obvious, is because in the case of searching for technological signatures, it's not a speculative idea that we may not be alone, that we may not be the smartest kid on the block, because about half of the stars, like the sun, have a planet like the Earth. And if you repeat circumstances, that you can have liquid water on the surface of the planet and chemistry of life, then you might as well get similar outcomes. That's common sense. Every person on the street would agree with that. And however, the search for others that may have developed technologies is completely pushed out of the mainstream. It's not funded, while at the same time, the scientific community is investing a lot of funds in things that are much more speculative. For example, the nature of the dark matter. Most of the matter of the universe, we don't know what it is. And some people suggested maybe it's one type of particle or another type of particle. And there are experiments trying to find out. And so far, for decades, we invested hundreds of millions of dollars, and all of them did not find the particle. Okay, so that's legitimate. That's part of the mainstream. It's part of the learning experience. You have ideas, proven wrong. But when dealing with a search for alien civilizations, we are not allowed to search because you need to provide extraordinary evidence before the discussion will even start. So now, if you're not giving funds to this, if the funding for searching is 1,000 times less than the funding given to the search for dark matter, and if young people are being bullied if they were to work on that, it's just like stepping on the grass and saying, look, the grass doesn't grow. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is wrong because the public cares a lot about this question. The public doesn't care if some solutions of string theory, are impressive in anti-de Sitter space.
String hypothesis, right? It's not string theory, it's string hypothesis. You can't test it, correct?
Yeah, exactly. You cannot even test it. Or if the multiverse exists because we can't really test it. Or, there are ideas that extra dimensions. And these are mainstream ideas where people give each other awards. And some of the people claim that they carry the torch of physics forward. What kind of a torch is it? If we don't test it, if they don't put their skin in the game, they don't make a prediction that can be proven wrong or right by an experiment. And the point is, not only they don't make such a prediction, but such a prediction will not be possible in the foreseeable future. Even if you think about it, in the next few decades, no. And then there are philosophers that say, oh, this is completely legitimate because if a bunch of physicists decides that something is right, that's enough. We don't need experiments. Physics is what physicists do. And, a lecturer gave a talk at the Black Hole Initiative, this center that I'm the director of. He was a philosopher, and he just claimed that. And I said, how can you say that? Physics is all about understanding nature, and the fact that a bunch of people agree on something doesn't make it right. You have to test it against experiments. And Galileo arrived at the notion that we are not at the center of the world because the Earth moves around the sun. Now, that was contrary to what Aristotle argued for 1,000 years. People accepted that we are at the center of the world. But Galileo found that it's most likely that the Earth moves around the sun. And a lot of philosophers at the time did not find that appealing. And they put him in house arrest. They didn't look through his telescope. But the thing about reality is it doesn't care whether we ignore it. You see, reality exists. It's whatever it is. So the best you can accomplish by putting Galileo in house arrest and not looking through his telescope is to maintain your ignorance. If that's what you want as a scientist, to maintain our ignorance, okay, fine. Animals are not interested in scientific knowledge. That's okay. But it seems to me like the culture in academia right now is different. The goal is to demonstrate that you are smart, that you are capable of playing in this sandbox that was defined completely artificially without any relation to nature. So you can decide about a mathematical construct that has no verification for experiments and just do mathematical gymnastics and demonstrate that you are smart, and that's good enough. If there is a community of people that are playing these games, they don't care about experimental verification. And that is dangerous because it's not really the profession. It's just like shoemakers deciding that they would start making cakes, baking cakes. Mm-hmm. They can do that, but then they shouldn't call themselves shoemakers. That physicists cannot call themselves physicists, not even physicists, but they actually claim that they carry the torch of physics forward, which is even worse than that because it's not even physics. My point is, a physicist should make a vow, just like medical doctors make, a physicist should say that at least one of the ideas that the physicist is working on will be tested experimentally in the laboratory or in space against data. And right now, that is not a prerequisite for activities within the mainstream. And at the same time, you have those cultures, and at the same time, the search for extraterrestrial civilizations is being bullied and ridiculed, whereas it actually follows common sense. The public is interested in that much more than in anti-de Sitter space of string theory. And, the public funds science. So how is that possible that you have this very strange climate in academia, which I, have a call for action in my book to change. So I'm trying to bring science to a healthier position. And I believe that this is what the public wants, because that's why my book is immediately a bestseller. But of course, people in academia who feel threatened by this proposition because they want to continue to portray an image where they don't make mistakes. And one way not to make mistakes is not to put any skin in the game, not to make predictions that can be falsified. And then they can glorify themselves. I don't like that, because that's not physics. And we have a learning experience, right? So we should behave like kids. We make mistakes. We don't worry so much about our ego. We just follow what the evidence tells us and learn something new about the world. Why does it have to be about us? It has to be about a dialogue with nature. And, it's really strange to see the response to my book from some members of the academic community, which, is not, I followed what basketball coaches say. Keep your eyes on the ball, not on the audience. And many of the responses keep the eyes of the people that write them on the audience rather than on the evidence that I'm discussing. So they will not criticize the scientific arguments that I'm making, but just make general statements and refer to each other. It's sort of like bullying, basically.
Do you think that, I know you have a history or you have a background in philosophy. Do you think that that's what's lacking, though, even though some philosophers might back the quantum, theorists and quantum physicists and stuff like that? Do you think, though, that the lack of the history of philosophy, lack of the philosophy of science, reading like Thomas Kuhn and that kind of stuff, do you think that's kind of what's missing? Because I see a lot of scientists on Twitter and social media speaking, from positions of authority, using fallacies left and right. Do you think that's an issue? Like, is philosophy being taught like philosophy of science, or is that something that's being missed?
Definitely. I think you need a broader view in order to see what's going on, because if you're focusing on a niche that is just technical and you drill in that niche, you don't see the big picture and you might be misguided. It's sort of like taking the wrong turn in the highway. So then you can follow that wrong turn and you can be the expert in that wrong turn, but it's the wrong turn. So in order not to make the wrong turn, you need a bigger map that shows you the possibilities, and that's what philosophy gives. It's a broader view. And also you need independence of mind. If you keep paying attention to everyone around you, they will keep justifying what they're doing, because otherwise it will reflect badly on them. And so you need to be independent, not care about what, how many likes you have on Twitter. And since I don't have any footprint on social media, I don't care. And also I have a tenured appointment, I have leadership positions. I don't really care what people say about me. I have the confidence that I can say what I think is right. Whereas younger people, around me, I can see they're really frightened because this bullying is going on even now, on Twitter and elsewhere. And one thing I notice is you see those people that write blogs or write popular science books. These are people that claim that they are scientists, they define themselves as scientists, but then you check on the archive and you find that they haven't published a scientific paper in more than a decade. So how can they call themselves scientists? I don't even care what they say, because they're not practicing scientists. Yet they post things as if they're scientists, make statements. They don't write scientific papers like I do. I have more than 800 papers, and over the past year I wrote 50 plus papers, and some of which are on Oumuamua and its implications. These people are not playing a fair game. They are not really scientists, and then they comment on it and they get attention as if they were making statements that are substantiated. But
yeah, it kills me.
It's really bad. I mean, I must say it's really bad, because I have to make this fight, and there is the social media arena, and there is a lot of bullying going on. And at the same time, the culture as a whole is misguided. It's more centered on portraying an image rather than on the substance. It's more about the audience rather than the ball, in the language of basketball. And it's frustrating, but I hope that I can change it. My real hope is my book is aimed at the younger generation. So I always pay attention to younger people because they don't carry a baggage of prejudice. They're not so attached to their ego. And my hope is that they would make the revolution. They would make the change. I lost hope with the older people,
Yeah, we need more great science communicators like you. I mean, you have the people that are in the public eye, and I'm not trying to call anybody out, but like a Brian Cox who claims, oh, there's no way there could be extraterrestrial life because we know all the particles that are out there. There's no way consciousness is anything special. Like, there's no, some of these people are speaking from positions of authority that actually, like you said, I don't see any papers. I don't see any data. I just see speculation and, theoretical, like you call it, mental gymnastics in a way.
Right. I mean, the key is really to follow the evidence. And, if you claim that this object, as we will discuss, is a natural object, not from a natural source, you need to come up with a specific scientific scenario where you explain all the anomalies associated with it. You can't just say that. And, I paid special attention to those proposals that people made about it being a natural object, and I have ruled them out as simple explanations. And by the way, all of them invoke something that we have never seen before. So my point is simple. If it's something that we have never seen before, why not entertain the possibility that it's artificial? That we have seen an object that is like a plastic bottle on the beach. Most of the time you see rocks that are naturally produced, and this one is the first one. What's so offensive in that statement? I mean, let's all embrace it and just get more evidence in the future of objects as we stroll down the beach. Let's look for plastic bottles. I mean, that's all I'm saying, and yet it gets so much backlash, you see. And it really is strange because I think the public would be extremely interested in such a search, and moreover, there will be much more funding for this from the public, and we can do it, and if we find an answer to this question, it would have a huge impact on society. It will be the biggest scientific discovery that we ever made. So how can we ignore it? In my book, I call it Oumuamua's wager. It's just like the wager of Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher that said, either God exists or God doesn't exist. If God exists, it has huge implications. Therefore, we have to take seriously that possibility. So the same thing with Oumuamua. If it's a technological relic, we have to take that seriously and check. We can't just dismiss it on a tweet. That makes no sense.
Right.
Why would we just have a prejudice that we are special and unique? My daughters, when they were young, thought that they're special, unique, until they went to the kindergarten, they saw other kids. And obviously, they would prefer to stay at home because then, they can keep the illusion. But if you want to get a sense of reality and not just feel in fantasy land, you want to get evidence.
Sure. So let's talk about Oumuamua now. The thing that I found interesting is, I've seen speculations about like, what if a near Earth object came close? How would we try and deal with it? And I know light sail has been thrown around as a possible solution to that. I don't know if it would work or not. I guess that's what I'm asking you. But how would that relate to this? Does it matter the shape of the object, if it's flat, if it's cylinder, or does it would a ball be tougher to light sail? Like, how does that work?
Yes. So the fundamental question about Oumuamua is whether it's a natural object or an artificial object. The other details are less important, but from the way that it reflected sunlight as it was tumbling every 8 hours, we can tell that the amount of light varied by a factor of 10 or more as it was tumbling. And we can tell that projected on the sky, it was at least 10 times longer than it is wide, but that's just projected on the sky. And if you imagine a piece of paper projected on the sky, then, as it's tumbling in the wind, it would look like an elongated object, but in fact, it's a piece of paper, flat. And trying to fit the amount of light that it reflected, gave at the 90% confidence the conclusion that it's probably pancake shaped at the 90% confidence, not cigar shaped the way it was depicted. Even though on the sky it looks elongated, but intrinsically it's pancake shaped.
Right.
And then it exhibited an extra push away from the sun, but it didn't have any gases around it that would propel it, that will give it a push like a rocket. So the only possible explanation I could think of was that it reflects sunlight and getting pushed. And that was fully consistent with the fact that the force declined inversely with distance squared in a smooth fashion, just like you get in a sail that is pushed by light. And so that's why the light sail hypothesis came. Now, it doesn't need to be designed as a light sail. All it needs to be is a thin object, an object that has a thin layer of material. So, for example, in September 2020, just a few months ago, there was another object discovered near the Earth, not far, that is pushed by sunlight and doesn't have a cometary tail. And eventually, the astronomers that discovered it with the same telescope, Pan-STARRS on Hawaii, they realized that this is a rocket booster from a 1966 launch called Lunar Lander Surveyor 2. And this rocket booster, is hollow and has a thin surface, and that's why it got this extra push. As long as you have a lot of area for its weight, you can push it with light. And this demonstrates that we can tell the difference between a thin object, even if it's not designed to be a sail, that is being pushed by light, and a rock. And to me, it illustrates that we can tell the difference between an artificial object and a natural object. And these are exactly the properties that Oumuamua shared with this object, that it was pushed without a cometary tail. And to me, we know that we produced this rocket booster, but Oumuamua, just came to us from outside the solar system. We don't know who produced it, but it's extremely interesting to find more of the same and figure out what they look like by sending a camera that will pass close to them and take a photograph. I had 66,000 words in the book that I just published, and if we had a photograph, a picture, they say, is worth 1,000 words. In my case, it would be worth 66,000 words. If we had a picture, I wouldn't need to write the book. I would just put a poster with that picture, and that would be it,
Yeah, you could superpose it into the Nimitz video.
No, I mean, but UFOs are different because I'll tell you why. UFOs, unidentified flying objects, assume that someone cares about us and trying to spy about us and hovers around, just around the Earth. That's a different proposition. And frankly, I don't think that we are special and interesting enough to be spied upon. I think that, we are very common probably. We're not we're not the smartest kid on the block, and we are relatively early into our technological development, only a century or so. So nobody really is interested in visiting us, spying on us. My wife, when I met her, had friends that were waiting for Prince Charming on a white horse to show up and make them a marriage proposal, okay? And that never happened. So why do we think that we are sufficiently attractive for someone to come and pay tribute to us?
Well, I mean, I think we've had UFO people. We've actually had some of the people on those aircraft carriers on the show, and they definitely saw something. There's definitely an experience there. So I guess my question would be, a lot of talk around anti-gravity technology, maybe different countries, maybe some sort of advanced tech. If it was anti-gravity, let's just say, since there's a lot of debate over that whole gravity to begin with, but let's just say it is some sort of anti-gravity technology. Could you set up an experiment to detect that in our air, our different, the sky or different, part of our overhead? I mean, would you be able to detect that?
That's exactly what came out from my discussion with Joe Rogan in his podcast. I think that obsessing on declassified Pentagon papers is the wrong approach. I mean, these were based on eyewitness testimonies that used old technologies and decades old. And now we have much better cameras, much better recording devices. Let's just deploy them in the same sites, the same regions, and it won't be too expensive. And record everything we see, and just check if there is anything unusual going on. That, to me, that's the best path forward, rather than arguing about what people saw decades ago. I don't really know if the reports are real or not. By the way, there is this biblical story about Abraham that in the Old Testament, that heard the voice of God asking him to sacrifice his only son, right, and Isaac. And if Abraham had a cell phone with a voice memo up, he could have pressed it and recorded the voice of God, and then everyone would believe the story. But if it's being told, you have to decide: do you believe the story or not? Is it just a metaphor that is used to convince us of something else, or is it did it really happen? But if you have a recording device that you can analyze, you can figure out if this is a myth or a real story. And my point is, instead of arguing about eyewitness testimonies like Abraham's story, we should just deploy recording devices that are much better now than we used to have in the past, and check it out. It's just the approach that kids have. The adults tell them this and that, and the kids just don't pay attention. They don't care. They want to test it themselves.
Right.
They want to see it for real. And I think we should adapt I am trying to maintain my childhood curiosity, and I think kids have the right attitude. Just check it out yourself, figure it out, because other people report about it. I don't know if it's real or not.
Yeah. So in terms of what would you do? Would you, like the LIGO or BICEP, some of these experimental things trying to detect gravitational waves? Obviously, that's super far away. That's from the earliest cosmic microwave background. How would you detect some sort of gravity interference or disruption within our own airspace?
First of all, you can deploy cameras. That now they're much better than we used to have decades ago. You just put them in strategic places and monitor the sky. Just that, because people reported about things appearing and moving very fast. So you should be able to see them with cameras.
And those videos are from our most forward-looking infrared sensors on these F-18s
but it's F-18. You see, that's the thing. They were designed for something completely different.
Right.
Scientists can bring in instruments that are far better than what the F-18 has. F-18 is a whole apparatus. It's you can put on an F-18. You can you have constraints. You can't put things that are very heavy or. So the point is, forget about the F-18, because that was designed for a completely different purpose.
Right.
Let's just have cameras that are state of the art. They can be as heavy as you want. Place them on the ground or wherever, and design the experiment such that it will be optimal for detecting things like that. And let's check, rather than rely on these testimonies.
100%. No, it's a great way of looking at it. Stop worrying about the past and start looking forward in ways that we can actually collect data and evidence on that. I'm right there with you.
Exactly.
So when you look at back to my question about the light sail thing, have you thought about the near-Earth objects and possible catastrophes and that stuff? And do you think that the light sail to direct one of these objects away is even a possibility?
Well, if you're using, for example, a laser beam to launch light sails, at high speed, you don't need a light sail to deflect the object. You can just shine the laser on the object and evaporate, a piece of it so that it gets pushed away from Earth, pushed to the side. It just needs to miss the Earth. If you know that it's coming straight into our view, then you want to just deflect it a little bit, nudge it. The earlier you catch it, the better. And the dinosaurs 66 million years ago saw this giant rock as big as the island of Manhattan approaching them, getting bigger on the sky. The view must have been fantastic until it hit the ground, and then the fun stopped. And even though they had big bodies, our brain, which is relatively small, is much more helpful for survival under such a catastrophe, because we can have astronomers that use telescopes that would monitor the sky and warn us about an incoming object that can harm us. and then we just need to deflect it. And one way is using a laser. Another one, you can paint it such that it reflects sunlight differently from one side and gets nudged, or you can shepherd it. You put a big object next to it that pulls it gravitationally and just moves it away from the Earth. What you don't want is to explode it into many small pieces, because that's what happened in the Gulf War with the Patriot missiles. The Patriot missiles were shot at incoming missiles, and they broke them into a lot of pieces. And having a large number of pieces was more dangerous, actually, than having one piece. You don't want to do that.
Interesting. So in terms of, you talk in your book, how would you detect other ways of detecting extraterrestrial life? And one of these is by waste or something they've created that like a remnants that's left over. I think you use CFCs as an example. Hypothetically, if we were to find something like that, would we try and engage, or like, what do you think? Do we just observe, or like, what would your advice be? Do we, should we just kind of hold back and see what happens, or?
Yeah, I think when you enter a room full of strangers, you better stay quiet and listen, because you never know who is in the room and what risks you might have. That would be the smart thing to do. Unfortunately, we've been broadcasting for a while, more than a century, radio waves. Mm-hmm. And if anyone with radio telescopes like we have exists within 100 light years, they know about us already. I mean, it may take them some time to respond, but we might hear back. The other thing is, we've been searching for radio signals for a long time, 70 years or so, from space. And I'm not sure it's the right approach to find evidence, or the best approach, because it's just like trying to speak on the phone, and you need the counterpart to be alive when you're speaking on the phone. Whereas if you're looking for a letter in the mail, if the post service is very slow, the letter may arrive to you after the sender is dead, it's not around. So you have a better chance of learning about the past. So if there were lots of dead civilizations that died by now, because the other stars formed the billions of years before the sun. Most stars formed before the sun. So there are likely to be many more dead civilizations than live civilizations. And therefore, you can find all the space probes that they sent out, all the space trash that they sent out, accumulated in space. And just like finding plastic bottles on the ocean that keep accumulating over time, and our biggest chance is to find, some object that looks artificial. It's not functional anymore because it's billions of years old. But I call that space archaeology because, we can't have a conversation over the phone with the Mayan culture. Right. They're gone by now. But we can find the relics they left behind through archaeological digs. And it's exactly equivalent. You can do an archaeological search for relics left behind in space. And it's possible that Oumuamua was really the very first artificial object that we found among all the rocks that we have seen before. So I think we should search for any interstellar object, any object that comes into the solar system from outside, just like searching for objects that enter your backyard from the street. And that saves us the need to travel far away because these objects made the travel already to arrive to us, and we can just look around. And I think it's an excellent way to find out what might be out there. And the fact that Oumuamua is very strange, weird, we can't really figure out what, that already raises an interesting question of whether these things are quite abundant. That when I find one ant in the kitchen, I know that there must be many more, right. Because I only searched a small region. And the same about Oumuamua. I'm sure there are many of those objects of the same level of weirdness that are already in the solar system. And we just need to keep looking, and in a few years we'll find another one and so forth. And, there will be a telescope much better than Pan-STARRS called the Vera Rubin Observatory that will become operational in a few years. And it could detect one every month. And then she
discovered dark matter too, didn't she, Vera Rubin?
Well, it will look for transients, things that vary on the sky, and you can use them like supernova, exploding stars. You can use them to figure out, maybe the nature of dark matter by measuring the expansion of the universe and all kinds of other. But the point is, it will survey the sky and find all these objects that arrived into the solar system from outside, all these interstellar objects. And that's a completely new frontier, I think, a very exciting one of space archaeology that we can start now, inspired by Oumuamua.
So you don't necessarily think there's actual life living on Oumuamua, correct?
No, because, most likely this trash spent billions of years, in space.
Right.
Space is a very harsh environment where if you put life on the surface of an object, there are cosmic rays bombarding it all the time, and they could easily kill it on a time scale that is much shorter than billions of years. And so it's difficult to imagine, unless, of course, they are hidden deep inside and protected from the cosmic rays. But I would guess it's just a piece of equipment which probably is junk, doesn't work anymore. But we can definitely, by taking a photograph, close-up photo, we can tell the difference between a rock and something else. And, even if we don't understand what this something else was, we can see that it's something else.
I'm gonna email Elon Musk right now, see if he can get some photos out there.
What we need is a lot of cameras, within the orbit of the Earth around the sun, just distribute. And it's not very expensive. You just deploy cameras. And when the next object that looks as weird as this one comes along, one of the cameras may be close to its path, and then you take a photograph.
Do you think that there's maybe not as many of them these objects because of the Oort clouds? Like, do you think that maybe since this came from outside, that it has to pass through this, gauntlet of other things or something along those lines?
No, most space is empty. There is no risk of it hitting something. But the point is that, if you feel that this one is special, that we were lucky to find it, then you violate the so-called Copernican principle. That's a principle based on the fact that Copernicus discovered that the Earth is not at the center of the world, at the center of the universe. We are not in a privileged place. And you can generalize it not being in a privileged time, So if you look at the sky for a few years and you find one object, it means that if you look for another 3 years, you'll find another one. There is no reason why you were privileged at that time. That will be a small probability. And so that's what I think is most natural. It's just like finding an ant in the kitchen. You look across a small portion of the kitchen, you find an ant, then should be many more because you just looked at a small portion, And
so do you think since that this is the one that we found that we latched onto, that we weren't really looking for these before, or we weren't paying attention or so? Okay.
We didn't have the capacity to look for it. So the Pan-STARRS telescope was really the first one that was sensitive to objects of this size, a few hundred feet, within the orbit of the Earth around the sun, It was the first one that was sensitive and was surveying the sky routinely. It was looking for near-Earth objects that are coming from inside the solar system, like Oort cloud objects or asteroids. And it was just the first telescope that was doing it and found this object within a few years. Mm-hmm. So my point is simple. Continue to look for a few more years, you'll find another one.
Have you already started keeping your eye out for another one? Is this something that's been ongoing?
Well, it's automatic. You see, the telescope is surveying the sky, and the astronomers will simply report whenever another interstellar object is found. There was a second one that was discovered by a Russian amateur astronomer. It's called Borisov because his last name was Borisov. Mm. And this one looked exactly like a comet, no different than the comets that we have seen before. And people came to me and said, look, this one is natural, right? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, doesn't it convince you that Oumuamua is also natural? To which I replied, if you find a plastic bottle on the beach and after that you find a lot of rocks, does it change the nature of the plastic bottle as to being a rock? Or another way to put it, when I met my wife on the first date, I thought that she's special and unique, and then I met a lot of people after that, and I still think that she's special. So the second object has nothing to do with the first object.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I know we were talking a little bit about UFOs earlier, but somebody was asking, do you think at any point in the past something's visited us, even if it was just to observe, like how we observe ants, or we send people to the jungle or the rainforest to look at the new bug species, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, one thing you need to keep in mind is that it takes an object like Oumuamua more than 10,000 years to traverse the Oort cloud, to traverse the entire solar system. And think about us 10,000 years back. We were not that interesting, right? So the point is, it's hard for me to believe, first, that we are sufficiently interesting for a visit, and second, that someone would have the foresight to send a probe if it moves at these speeds, So I would think, probably it's just something not intended and entered the solar system, and there are plenty of those things, and we just need to look, and we'll find another one, and then we can examine it, take a photograph, or maybe even land on it and learn more about it. But I don't think that it's likely that anyone was planning to spy on us. That's my tendency.
What about like an AI thing,
say all of this is driven by modesty. I mean,
right.
I think guiding principle that you get from doing astronomy is that we should be modest. We are such a small component in the big scheme of things. The universe, our lifetime is really short compared to the age of the universe. The technological civilization that we have, all the technologies we have, were for a century, and it's one part in 100 million of the age of the universe. It's really tiny. So we tend to think about us as prominent and important, but we are really not very significant, and I have a hard time believing that someone is really watching us and caring about us. We're probably just along, because there are many others that are similar and nobody cares especially about us. It's just like having ants on the sidewalk. When you walk down the street, you don't pay attention to every ant. It's
yeah.
What about like the von Neumann probe idea, or like AI technology? Like, what if a civilization got so advanced that they could, send all these self-replicating probes out? Like, is that something that we could look forward to, this technology and these technological signatures in the universe that maybe have been replicated, that maybe even the civilization that created them is no longer around?
Yeah, so the idea of a self-replicating machine is interesting, because what it means is that whichever machines replicate themselves would be the most abundant, they would be the most numerous. It's sort of like a Darwinian selection, that those that replicate are the most common, that, if you decide to be a nun and you don't have any kids, and then you're not likely, then you will not reproduce, and you will not, continue to be part of society. And but if you have a machine that replicates a lot, then that would be most likely for us to be abundant, and we will find it. And yeah, so we don't know, right? So we don't know whether there are von Neumann machines, but the idea itself is interesting, because we could search for those things that not only exist but also produce copies of themselves, and then they become very. So how can we find out? Well, suppose we see two plastic bottles that look identical, like they look the same, and then we see a third one that looks the same. We know that there must be a production line somewhere, that makes similar things.
Yeah, you talk about also spreading out and kind of not keeping all the eggs in one basket. You talk about, let's get to the moon, let's get to Mars, let's get spread out a little bit. Is there any advantage, though, from like a discovery standpoint of, let's say, setting up an observatory on the moon or setting up an observatory on Mars, that we like an advantage that we don't have here because of maybe our atmosphere or different things?
Yeah, definitely. The moon is just like a museum, because it doesn't have an atmosphere. So on Earth, objects that are smaller than the size of a person. They burn up in the atmosphere. They are called meteors. We see them burn up and then nothing is left. Only if they're much bigger than the size of a person, they last, and some core of them reaches the ground. But on the moon, there is no atmosphere. So all the objects pile up on the surface of the moon. And also, it doesn't have any geological activity. There is no turnover of whatever is on the surface. It's not being brought and mixed with material inside. On Earth, anything that landed on the surface of the Earth more than 100 million years ago is mixed now in the interior because of geological activity. And so the moon is really interesting. It's just like an archaeological site where all the objects that landed on the moon can be found on its surface, and potentially some of these may be pieces of equipment, the interstellar probes that just hit the moon. It was like a fishing net collecting things, and it would be really amazing if we were to search the surface of the moon. And obviously, most of the time you find rocks, but suddenly you see something that looks artificial, that would be, and we didn't launch it, it looks like we are not responsible for this thing, and it's on the surface, it's like an archaeological dig. You find things that you may have not expected. So that would be really interesting. That would be an opportunity for us to put our hands on an artificial object that came from far away.
Do you see that as possibly being a future discipline, like astroarchaeology, in terms of getting out there and actually doing these archaeological digs on these other planets or taking samples? And I guess that's kind of what they do with rovers, but they don't ever actually find anything that interesting, right? So,
right. But there is another way to do it. You can go on the surface, but you can also hover above the surface and take photographs and then analyze them. That would uncover whatever is on the surface. If you want to go deeper than the surface, then you need to dig, and that's also a possibility. At first, we might just go around the surface and see if there is anything unusual, and we can do the same thing on Mars, of course. That's also possible.
Do you think that when you look at the way science is progressing, that obviously there's some setbacks, and there's this like slow crawl that we talked about earlier, but do you think that we need to push the envelope in other ways too, not just searching for extraterrestrial life, taking chances in other aspects of your discipline too, and like the dark matter thing, the gravitational waves, gravitation, the whole gravity thing? Like, is there people doing what you're doing in those other disciplines, or do we need more of that?
We definitely need more of that. And I think the first thing that should be emphasized is that whoever puts skin in the game, whoever takes a risk and makes predictions that can be falsified, should get rewarded, okay? Rather than people that show that they are smart based on intellectual gymnastics, which is pretty much the culture right now. And the measure of success should be in putting forward ideas that can be tested, that are appealing, and that should be the criterion by which we make progress, because we learn from nature rather than assuming that we know things in advance, prejudice and trying to demonstrate that we are smart. It's not about us. It's a dialogue with nature, and it's about figuring out, just like kids learn about the world, they take risks, they sometimes get injured because they make the wrong move, but it's okay to get injured. If your image is stained a little bit because you took some risk and made a mistake, it's not, if you don't have bruises, it means you're not taking any risks, and you are boring. That's my main point. You are boring. If you repeat things that we already know, you can get into honorary societies and pretend that you are very respectable, wear a tie, and everyone claps their hands, but you are boring. And the only way for you to be interesting is by taking some risks and going in directions that will, expose new knowledge for us. And that's really what it's the burning front of knowledge, trying to, make progress. And we can make mistakes. That's part of the game. That let's innovate. Let's take some risks. And I think it's missing right now. And just to give you an example, you mentioned gravitational waves. So the proposal to build LIGO. When I was a postdoc, just finished my PhD, and I came to Princeton, it was ridiculed, and people said, that will never work. People in the astronomy community said it will never work. Then in 2013, I gave a lecture at the winter school about gravitational wave astrophysics, and 10 minutes into my talk, a relatively young faculty member stood up and said, "Why are you wasting the time of these students on a subject that will never be important during their career?" And he was very confident of himself, like an alpha male, standing up, telling me what to do. I was much more senior than he is. And then 2 years later, LIGO detected the first gravitational wave signal, for which the Nobel Prize was awarded. And you just think about it, the same students that I lectured to were still doing their PhD when the LIGO detection took place. And this guy was telling me that I'm wasting their time. It was during their PhD that the first gravity, and then the Nobel Prize was given to that. And that shows you how conservative, and this guy was younger than I am, and he was trying to establish his reputation by basically bullying or saying something bad about a field that hasn't emerged yet, okay? The same was true on exoplanets, the discovery of planets around other stars. In 1952, there was a proposal in a paper that Otto Struve, an astronomer, made, saying that, if you have a Jupiter-like planet close to a star, it will move the star back and forth in a measurable way. Or it could pass in front of the star, you will see the diminution of light from the star. And that proposal did not receive any support. Time allocation committees on telescopes said, we don't want to waste telescope time in looking for such systems because we know that Jupiter is far away from the sun, and we understand why, and therefore there shouldn't be any Jupiters close to their stars. There shouldn't be any, and why should we waste our time looking for them? And then in 1995, someone dared to look and found, and these people got the Nobel Prize just a few years ago, okay? And they found the first Jupiter star system, and that opened a whole new field of exoplanets. Now, you may argue, okay, no harm was done, so 4 decades, nothing was found, but then eventually science found these things. The point is, it took 4 decades, and if we were to find it earlier, it would have improved the efficiency of science. By now, we would make more progress. But beyond that, this is a baby that managed to get born. There are many unborn babies, basically that were suffocated or suppressed completely, and we didn't get them to fruition. And and science suffers from that. And so my point is, if you look at the commercial sector, you look at companies, they have a team of people that work on risky propositions, and they realize that even though they're up for profits, that if you take risks, you can find something completely new that nobody else has, and they can make a profit of it that will compensate for all the losses they have from failed ideas. And they recognize that. So why would the academic community be more conservative? It's supposed to be more open-minded. It's not up for profit. It's a non-profit. Universities are non-profit organizations by definition. They get tax deductions. They are non-profit. If they are non-profit, they should not have the bottom line on their portfolio. They should encourage people to innovate, right? And when I come and say, Oumuamua looks strange, we should consider the possibility that it's technological signature. What do I get in return? People bullying it, ridiculing it, and not even willing to discuss it as a serious possibility. And I ask you, how is that possible? Academia is supposed to be embracing this and saying, okay, you made an interesting proposal. The public seems to be extremely interested. You made an interesting proposal. Let's collect more evidence and test it out.
Well, that's where a lot of the debate and the animosity, I think, when you see people that don't trust certain aspects of science or whatever, it's because I don't think they're investigating the things that people want them to investigate or the public wants out of it.
And by the way, there is this notion of science as an occupation of the elite. I think it's a self-inflicted wound in the sense that scientists use science sometimes to elevate themselves, to put themselves on a pedestal, and only inform the public when the results are conclusive, and not to engage the public when there is, and then work on things that are like asking how many angels can sit on the tip of a pin. that the public doesn't care about. And I think that's a big mistake, because science is of interest to the public. And if only the scientists would be willing to address the topics that are of interest to the public, and the public funds science, it should be, the two sides should be engaged together. I think science is a way of life. It's not a status symbol. You're not supposed to think, oh, I'm smart, therefore, I will not degrade my profession by speaking to the people. That makes no sense.
Right.
And, when I meet people that help me with all kinds of household, a plumber that comes to fix something at home, I speak with them about science just like I speak with my colleagues. And sometimes I enjoy it even more because, people are more open-minded.
Exciting and passionate, yeah.
Yeah. So I think science should be accessible to everyone. It should address the questions that are of interest to the public, and it should be explained to the public. So if we don't have enough evidence, we should tell the public what's the problem. Why hide it from the public and only come out and lecture as if the public is students in a classroom and lecture what the results are when we are 100% sure. And by the way, many times when scientists are 100% sure and lecture to the public, then they retract and say, oh, we made a mistake, actually, and it's not what we said. And that happens a lot in press conference. So that is a completely twisted way of presenting science. Science is a work in progress. It should never be pretended to be the ultimate truth that is given as a lecture in a class. We should let the public know, okay, we didn't have enough evidence. There are several possibilities. We are now exploring them. And then the public will believe you when you say, okay, we got more evidence and now we are sure. The public would believe you.
Absolutely. Well, actually, I know we're on a time constraint, so let's wrap it up here so we can do a short Patreon segment. But listen, we really appreciate it. Maybe we can get you back on here in the future. Maybe there's a new discovery around the bend. But we really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your book, Extraterrestrial. You can check out his book on Amazon. I have the link down below. It's Kindle, and he's also on Audible, too. So check that out 100%. And we really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we love everybody out there. Stay safe. And if you're interested, we're about to do a Patreon segment. It should be up later tonight. So we love everybody. Stay safe, and we'll catch you next time.
Peace.